Well, pantheism is pretty. It's simpler than what you made it out to be. So what you denoted was theism, etc., blah blah blah, but not necessarily pantheism. Usually people take the minimalist position. So if one were to say, claim that they were agnostic theists, for example, they're not an agnostic; they're more of a theist. A pantheist is still a deist. Just somebody who's a pantheist, you have to be more open-minded than what you're portraying. You're portraying the highest form of the definition, which is not true. To be a pantheist is usually based on evidence, like a regular pantheist. It's based on what is out there. And it's not the best explained position, like T-Jump would say. No. In fact, T-Jump would quote one of the least popular physicists to say that to confuse the macro and the quantum realm is a big mistake, and that's not true. Sorry, that wouldn't be true for any physicist at all throughout the entire history of time. That would be an interpretation, and that interpretation is objectively wrong. It can be proven to be objectively wrong because all the classical reality, including Roger Penrose would say, collapses to the classical reality. In other words, all the times that quantum mechanics would collapse, it would collapse into the classical reality. Therefore, all the classical reality is made up of the quantum reality. It's no confusion. The entire macro level is made up of particles in the quantum reality, and the entire particle level is made up of even more quanta realms. There's no confusion. And to understand this truth is not a side note. To understand this truth means that even time itself is an emergent property from the quantum field. It's a conclusion on this part. In other words, if you understand the nature of physics, the very nature of physics, which is over 100 years old, you don't have to be a genius to understand the very nature of physics, but you understand that every single thing, every conclusion means that everything is interconnected. That is the minimalist portion. Everything is interconnected. Then, by consequence, you're a pantheist. You don't have a choice. You are a pantheist. The entire nature of reality is interconnected through quantum mechanics. There is no escape. And the emergent properties of time and space make that even more problematic. Everything's interconnected through space and time then. Being that, the very notion that something makes up time makes it divine, because it precedes, and even creates and manifests time. It is beyond a God. Being beyond a God, it is more divine. Now, if you were to argue, well, it has no consciousness, it doesn't need a consciousness. This is how complex pantheism can get. It does not need a consciousness in order to know. The fact that it knows is enough. If it has the entire, let's say, if you will, the Akashic record, the entire collection of all the information in the universe, it could be a state type of mind. It doesn't need processing in order to think. It can think in states, instantaneous states, billions of a second, throughout the entire cosmos for a billion trillion years. It doesn't need a mind to think. It doesn't need processes. It doesn't even need to remember in states, because it maps out all the possibilities at exactly all the same time. It would be unnecessary for it to need a mind, a simple mind, that somebody made up and mapped in their head in order to think. No, that God is a silly God. No, my God doesn't need a mind to think, to create, to make, destroy, blah, blah, blah. My God is way more divine than any interpretation by any religious fanatic. And to deny its existence is just wrong. I mean, you're allowed to be wrong. Sure. You're allowed to be wrong. But the fact that it exists because of the inevitability of the facts of nature. If nature was completely deterministic, we wouldn't have nature. If nature had indeterministic qualities, then we have what we call life, where there are indeterministic qualities that collapse into deterministic qualities that lead to almost every inevitable outcome, which will lead to eventually human beings. Every other branch of life on the planet happens inevitably, and then you end up with the quality of human beings. Sure, that didn't happen because it was determined to happen. Any wrench thrown into the system would have blown it up. And the idea that it was all completely deterministic is completely incorrect. To ignore the quantum outcome of all of it is to miss the entire picture of reality. To assume that that's how it had to play out just because you assume that the past is set in stone, and it's not, unfortunately. No, the paradoxes consistently exist and are consistently solved with quantum mechanics. They are. If you want to say that, well, let's say that human beings have no free will. Okay. If you took the Penrose argument, or you took the physics argument on biology, which, by the way, any wrench you want to throw into the argument, like T-Jump would throw, like, for example, there's this one physicist who says that there's no connection between the macro and the quantum level because he's completely, in my opinion, stupid. He's not interpreting the math. He's making an interpretation because of his beliefs of what reality is, and his belief doesn't matter to me. The interpretation of the math is what matters to me, and the interpretation of the math says that the quantum state collapses at observation, which means the conscious state is the observation state, which means there's a quantum state, there's a sub-quantum state before that collapses into a deterministic reality in the past from the future, meaning that the quantum state goes back in time to make a choice, to make a determined state. The allowance of going back in time automatically endorses free will. There is no need for a soul. That is the pure pantheist perspective. Pantheist perspective has always been the mathematical perspective, has always been the non-deterministic perspective, has always been the ether perspective, has always been the perspective that everything came out of the mathematical reality, or has always been everything came out of a more deep reality, and the quantum reality is that reality, is that perspective. Quantum naturalism is pantheism. You can't get out of it. Once you accept quantum mechanics, you cannot escape from quantum naturalism. You could deny quantum mechanics, and then you're just a realist who doesn't know shit about anything. You're a materialist who doesn't know anything about anything on the deepest levels of reality. Now, one would ask, well, in order to find your God, you would need some kind of sophisticated computer and algorithms in order to do, well, all you had to do for the last 6,000, 10,000, 150,000 years was have a piece of glass or water and show that light was a particle and a wave. Nothing complex. You don't even need, in fact, you don't even need a particle gun for that. You just need the profound observation that light in and of itself throughout the entire universe, which is everywhere, is that a particle and a wave. And then the solution to that problem is quantum mechanics. It's as simple as that. A guy with a 110 IQ could solve that problem. Most of the people had a granted 130, 140, 160. But a guy with 110 IQ could solve that problem with quantum mechanics. That is, that the average intelligence above just 1,000 years after human beings evolved to observe light could solve that problem. That means that the argument could have been made 150,000 years ago. Yet, any substantial life claimed prior to human beings, you could have made that argument again. And then, for any life form in the future, throughout the entire existence of this known universe, up to like 4 to 5 billion more years, can still make that argument. Yes. For the last 12 billion years, any intelligent life can observe that the nature of reality is divine. And anybody for the next 5 billion years before the universe extinguishes itself can observe that the nature of reality is divine. Not that complicated. Not that complicated. And in fact, more deep than evolution ever was.